welcome back, listeners, to this beautiful episode of the Mindful Living podcast. Now, let me tell you something. We spend so much of our lives wearing masks we didn't even know we put on. I'm fine, I'm doing good, that mask. The I've got it all figured out mask. The one we wear at work, at home, even in front of the mirror. But what happens when the mask starts to crack? When the version of us that once kept us safe starts to suffocate us instead? Today, on this episode of The Mindful Living, I'm your host, Sana, as always. My guest knows that feeling all too well. Before becoming a therapist, she was thriving, at least on paper, in the corporate world. The job, the travel, the paycheck, all the external wins. But inside, there was an emptiness she couldn't ignore. Her story, listeners, is one of courage, the kind that doesn't make headlines but reshapes lives. So, we are diving into what it really means to unmask, to connect to that raw, unfiltered part of ourselves that's been waiting to breathe. So, listeners, we are going to peel back the layers with someone who knows the power and the pain of becoming home to herself. So, listeners, meet my lovely guest, Alicia Zielinski-Straub. Alicia, welcome to the show, and it's really an honor to have you here with us.
Thank you so much, Sana. I'm very grateful to be here with you today and have this fruitful discussion.
Totally, and this is so much needed right now, Alicia, because um personally, like, I have had so many situations where it's such a devastating feeling that you are in your workplace, maybe you are in your you know that office parties or corporate gatherings, you are having your lunch with your colleagues, you are in the meeting and you're just like putting a very blank smile and saying, yeah, 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 I'm all good, how are you, and all that. But behind, I have felt that emptiness sometimes within me as well, and that feeling, it's really devastating. So, thank you so much for being here and sharing your journey and your insights. So, with that, let's begin to understand your shift from corporate to counseling. You have mentioned that despite all the external success, the travel, the money, the paycheck, the thrill, you still felt a void. So, could you walk us through those moments? What exactly you felt, and what do you think that hole inside you was trying to tell you back then?
Well, looking back, it really has been a journey. And about 2.5 years ago, I went on my first retreat. And so this was many, many years after I had left the corporate world and entered into a graduate program for mental health counseling and, was successfully of building a private practice as a therapist. And I really, really thought that, I was filling that void, that space inside of me that was constantly searching for something, and I really thought I had filled it. But when I had gone away on this like transformational immersive experience, I tapped into something deeper that I didn't know was available to discover. And it came from the just this space of stillness and pure consciousness. And what I had realized in the corporate world and then in my private practice was that I was very much reliant upon the operations of the mind, very, very cognitive, very mental with the mental activity. And so for the first time, although I was a practitioner of yoga and I really thought I was living mindfully, it dawned on me how we really do need to connect to this natural intelligence within through the use of the breath and the senses. And, when we do that in different ways, many different ways to be able to do that, there's this just natural ability, this intuitive capacity for
Mhm.
us to understand what we need to do, for us to gain insights, to access creativity and problem solving without having to force or to over effort or to figure things out, to control, to analyze, to manipulate, to plot and plan. And it's really fascinating. What I had discovered ultimately was, it's really about the nervous system and nervous system regulation. And just working with that, I guess, like, consistently, each day with consistent daily practices, how we can rewire ourselves to be in a state of calm.
Yep,
And when we're in that space, the whole goes away, and
yep,
it's contented. It's a feeling of contented, if that makes any sense, Sana.
yeah, yeah. No, it does. And I think you explained it um it's so beautifully because it's not just on the surface level, but there are so many our body, our emotions, our feelings, how we feel like everything is so intricately connected. So I think it is a really really a very profound take on this, and I think it's wild to reflect like how success can be both a dream and then a distraction as well, Alicia.
Yeah, for sure. And, you just used the word wild, and the same word is popping up in in my mind as well,
Mhm.
because each day feels like it can feel like an adventure, like an opportunity to discover. And although some of the terms that I come across, which can seem maybe a little new age or quote unquote woo woo to some people, like, for example, infinite possibility. Like,
Mhm.
it's really true. Like, if we don't have enough of awareness to recognize the masks that we're wearing, which oftentimes come in the form of our defense mechanisms,
Yeah.
whatever they may be, how we personalize things, they could come in, odd behaviors, like demonstrations. It's, when we begin to open up to the reality that we all do this as part of our human predicament and watch for it, and we remove these habitual tendencies,
Mhm.
there's constant growth opportunities. There's constant capacity for greater authentic connection and to truly feel like supported and encouraged and part of something larger than oneself. So in essence, like, removing the mask and connecting to our core, um it's really about evolving beyond, the personal layer of the mind, or like that ego, so to speak.
Hmm. That absolutely makes sense. And it can be scary. I mean, because um I think it's scarier than when we confront ourselves. I think it's scarier than confronting anything external. So I think it's a very obvious thing to know that it can be messy, but I think sometimes we find clarity in that chaos, in that mess.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. And that's why I think having mechanisms in place for us to remain grounded and regulated, and when we look at the neuroscience aspect of all this and just the nervous system, like,
Mhm.
again, going back to the power of breath and oxygen moving through the body, regulating our different systems and organs so that when it gets scary, we can remain within our window of tolerance to
Mm,
be with the feelings, to be with the thoughts, to be with the sensations without reacting to them, sort of as that like witness observer, like just being conscious of it and letting it be. And so the mindfulness aspect comes alive like
mhm,
throughout the day when we can be with these experiences as they are without the judgment, like really truly leaning in with the spirit of curiosity and compassion rather than trying to explain things or back away or avoid or press things down or compulse
mhm,
in other ways. We know just we remain consistent with the breath and into the present moment through the use of the senses.
mm,
And as uncomfortable as things can be, when we remain grounded as that observer, what
mm,
we experience is that it passes, and it passes relatively quickly, these emotional experiences. In fact,
mm,
they could pass an emotional experience, which we really need to honor rather than analyze, pick apart, or judge, can surface and release within 90 seconds if we don't start to allow the mind to latch on and analyze,
mm.
and create something that most likely is not grounded in any shape of reality.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that. And as you mentioned about mindfulness, and then you also mentioned about mechanisms. Now, this is something interesting, which I really, really, I would love to share with our listeners that you have compared personal growth to the third law of physics, which is for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. But when you began changing internally, like did your outer world, like relationships, career, sense of belonging, did all of these shift too?
Yes, in fact, for me personally, and also in working with clients, in particular couples, or when there's like relational issues, there's that natural tendency to blame or expect other people or circumstances outside of us to change. But truly, when w when one, even if just one person,
Mhm.
does what they need to do with regard to tending to the inner world, and initially just noticing these things without having to change anything immediately, just the simple noticing and that, I guess, sacred pause, so to speak. I guess it was Viktor Frankl, said, in between the stimulus and the response is space, and in that space lies freedom, and when we take a breath and we don't react, which is nearly impossible to do if one is outside of their window of tolerance in a state of hyperarousal and activated in fight or flight. We don't realize that most of us are running around in it with a dysregulated nervous system, and we're reacting. But when we learn to just breathe and everything slows down, we can choose differently rather than entering into just the autopilot mode. I mean, and there's a point to autopilot mode. There's a great purpose. I mean, if we had to contemplate what fine motor skills to use to pick up the toothbrush and brush our teeth in the morning, we would never get out of the house. So this autopilot, this habitual, implicit, underlying, tendencies serve a great purpose until they don't serve a great purpose.
Hmm. Yeah, that is really, really practical, because um I think sometimes it really becomes because we are social beings. So sometimes that transformation or that change can feel or can be perceived as abrupt, or people may call, okay, so you want your own time, maybe you're becoming self-centered or you're becoming selfish. And I think it's such a human crossroads, like choosing between that comfort of connection and then the truth of alignment.
Sure. Yeah. And when we think about this and this idea of it being somewhat selfish,
Mm.
what is the intention behind taking the time for oneself, and if it is to be able to ground down, to connect to oneself, to create the space. So you think about boundaries and how important boundaries are, and boundaries, it's like it allows us to create these containers within ourselves, that so there's enough of space so we can explore, we can reflect, we can see these tendencies at work, and whether we're moving emotional energies through, or we're processing and integrating. And when we take those moments and allow that to occur, we show up more wholesome, more genuine, more sincere, more loving, kind to one another, patient. If we're dysregulated and we're trying to jump in and spend time and contribute to the collective, like do something beyond ourselves, it's really hard to do that in a way that feels a bit more loving and trusting versus fear-based, or for lack of a better term, with a personal agenda.
Mm.
It's pure, and it's real, and it's authentic, and the energy of being in that space, because I know it doesn't take very long for me to drop back into the other space, but with practice and rewiring the neural circuitry, we basically begin to reestablish a new baseline for living, and this way of living, it's not compartmentalized.
Mm.
So, as we begin to change, everything around us starts changing as an indirect reaction to our changes, so back to the idea of, for example, two people, a couple, being in the counseling session. If one person does what they need to do, like, it's just phenomenal to watch what happens with the other person. And, even within my own life, I observe this, but, that's a hard thing to do, because we want, it's whether it's a power struggle, or wanting to be right, or afraid of being wrong. Like, it's really not about that. It's the capacity to appreciate the importance of our subjective experiences that go on within ourselves and each other, and to really want to see another person, and to want to, with a sense of awe and reverence, just appreciate the complexities of life.
Mm. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. And um, before we conclude, Alicia, like you, um, you said that it's kind of a funny take that being in this field is like getting a quote unquote masters in the obvious. So awareness, it isn't always peaceful. It can be exhausting. So do you ever wish you could unknow some of what you know about human behavior? It's quite a strange question, but yeah, I would love to know your thoughts.
Life is not easy,
Mm.
and it's filled with everything. And I remember there were certain factors that led me to believe that my purpose on this planet was to be happy. And, happiness is a feeling. It like other feelings, that they all have jobs to do, like employees in an organization. Each feeling is trying to convey information, seek itself to be expressed, so we're motivated to take action, these firings of chemicals. And when I redefined my purpose, because I realized that was unachievable and, unrealistic, to like learning and growing. Like, and I really feel like if we can reframe our perspectives, that at least part of our purpose is to really learn and grow, to be able to allow for the expansion into this realm of infinite possibilities, even when it's tough, and even when there's something I don't wanna see. I know the value in seeing it, especially the shadow parts that we try to keep buried within ourselves. Like, when we illuminate these things and we just acknowledge them, they lose power over us significantly, and we just step into life in a lighter way, and oftentimes, with a lot less shame, which is a very tricky feeling. We don't even know that it's creeping in, but when it starts to dismantle itself, and I think that has a lot to do with why people feel a bit lighter, because shame, it's a heavy feeling, and it's really not about there's something inherently wrong with me or with these things that aspects that the mask covers. It really truly is a product of the conditions, all of the experiences up until this point in time that have shaped the way we perceive and interpret information. And we can uncondition that and rewire it in new ways, but we need to understand it's not who I am. It's what has happened and the impact that our experience have had on our nervous system and how we move about the world.
Right, right. That's that's very well explained. So, Alicia, if listeners they would like to connect with you, to share their thoughts on this and also seek your resources, what would be the best way?
They can email me. My email is available through my website at Alicia, Alicia, Z as in zebra, Straub, STRAUB.com, or on Instagram or Facebook. Journey with Alicia is my tag. Or, from my website, there's a contact number, they can call or they can text. I just really love to engage with people that are really into this stuff because it makes a world of difference.
Absolutely. That's so true. Great. So, listeners, I'll have all the links in the show notes for you to connect with Alicia. So, if I can wrap this up, if I can just say what I have realized and what I've understood is unmasking it isn't about changing who we are. I believe, as Alicia very perfectly helped us to understand that it is about remembering who we have always been. And sometimes that remembering it hurts before it heals. So to everyone listening, I pray this conversation is your reminder to pause, to ask yourself, whose voice am I living by right now? Is it mine or is it the world's? So, Alicia, thank you so much for being the guiding light here to help us get started on this exploration of knowing ourselves and removing the hidden masks. And thank you so much. This was really, really very, very insightful.
Thank you, Sana. It's been a pleasure being with you, and I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning into this episode of The Mindful Living. Until next time, keep unmasking, keep listening, and keep coming home to yourself, just as Alicia did. Thank you.